Hi, welcome to Bright Hope Creations. I'm Kara, and today is part 2 of creating this little Christmas bakery. And this time we're focusing on coloring up the animal images. You'll see a few little things colored here and there as I go along, but basically it is about the animals. And so here is our penguin mail carrier. And the feet and beak are a YR21 and 15. The 15 brightens it up a little. And I'm going to darken that up a little later because it's a bit bright. And I'm going to start on the feathers. So this is a C4, and that really is to get started, I guess, to lay down some color where I know the black areas will be. And that way I'm not going in right away black. If I want some highlights or something, if I start dark, I typically lose my highlights. So I start light, and now I'm coming in with a C8 to put in my darker areas there. So finding under his hat and on his back side, because that lantern is giving a little light to the front, but not a lot. So this scene is going to eventually become an evening scene. So the sun is still kind of up, but it's getting dark outside. Well, I went from the C8 to a C6 and just blending that out into the body a bit. And I don't leave a lot of highlight there, but what little I do, I'm going to blend in with that C4, which is what I started with. I mean, there's not a lot of variance in his silky black feathers. So onto his face, and I'm using a C0 here, and I'm pushing back the eye area by just kind of giving that a shadow and then curving under the roundness of his face, and then putting shadows in to round him out down on his body, and also with some shadow from his mailbag. And now I'm going to blend that out with a C00. I'm not getting very dark here, keeping him white, but I decide I can go a little darker in the shadow areas there. And once I'm happy with that, I'm looking at the orange of the beak and the feet, and decide an E31 to kind of tone them down a little bit. And he's all set. So I'm going to move on to our mouse, and this mouse, I've decided, is going to be kind of a combination of brown and grays. So the E40s are kind of a grayish brown, and then this warm gray. So a W1 just to get those shadows in, and I'm going to go back and forth between the warm grays and the E40s to give him his little fur there. You'll notice I have not colored in the hats and scarves and such yet. I'm actually going to do that later once I know what colors I need to spread around the scene and what colors I really want to put into the scene. So they'll kind of color coordinate with their background and with each other once I know what colors I want to go with. I really like to kind of keep similar colors in a card so that it's not too busy. So once I decide on what those colors are going to be, then that's how I determine who's wearing what on this scene. All right, so you can see I really am just going back and forth with those 40s and warm grays and just finding the shadows and then also rounding them out a little bit so that they have some dimension to them. And this little guy, he doesn't have much on his body. You can see I haven't done the face yet. And the reason for that is I want to show you how different it looks with just one color than with the grays and the E's together. So I'm just going to do it with the E's on his face at first, and then I'll add in the warm grays. But it'll just show you how different it looks when you combine two different color families together. And you saw I put in a little bit of R21 to pinken up his ear in there, and I'll do that for the cheek these are all just the 40s. And now I'm coming in with the warm gray, and it really does warm it up a bit. And it looks more like the body now. Oh, I guess that was an R20 in his ear. Well, anyway, so now I'm just blending that out. He's going to have a little bit of a white face at the front by his nose and mouth. And so I'm trying to be real gradual in shading that, but getting some darker spots there, just touching it with the darker colors. So not real dark, it's E43 and 42. To give those shadows a little bit more of a punch. I want to mention these are Purple Onion design stamps illustrated by Stacey Yacula for her Sweetest Little Town release. Well, R20 for the cheek, and then some warm gray, a W00, to kind of diffuse that. So just touching over that R20 so that it blends into the cheeks. All right, now we're on to our squirrel down at the bottom, trimming the tree. And this is going to be a combination as well. This is going to be warm grays and cool grays together. And I'm starting to find the shadows with my warm gray and defining the areas that we're going to have the darker of the colors on him. And now with the W2 going in and adding that. So usually I start with a lighter color to find the shadows, because if I don't like where I put those shadows, I really haven't messed anything up yet, because it's such a light color, it wouldn't matter. So he doesn't get too dark, but I do come in later at the end to darken him up a little bit, because once the scene is all done, you kind of can see if he was looking a little flat, and so he just needed a little bit more shading. Well, here I'm starting with the cool grays now and blending that in with the warm grays. And once everything is colored, he's really going to kind of look like a white squirrel. I wasn't sure how much cool gray I wanted to mix in there with the warm gray. This is a C1, and I'm using that as shadows. We'll see as we go on if I decide to go darker with that. But at this point, that's where I decided to stop that and start blending it in with the warm grays. This is a W3, so I think this is as dark as I go at this point for the warm grays on this little guy. Getting under that scarf and down where the tail starts and the back of his head, just to define those areas a little bit better. Now, if you're just joining me for this series, this is the second of the series for this card. The first video was about stamping the whole scene and techniques for masking and positioning rubber stamps. And so if you didn't catch that and are interested, you can go back and find that one right there in my playlist. And okay, see, now I'm deciding, okay, we need to get that C3 in there. So it's really kind of balance between the cool and warm grays in this little guy. Blending that out with a C1 and making sure he kind of has that roundedness in his arm, and just fanning it up the tail a little bit more. And now that I had the C1, I'm coming back with the W1. Just give him some on his belly. Decided that's going to be more of the warm gray to give it a distinction between the rest of the body. And a little bit of R20 in the ears. And then kind of diffuse that with the W00. All right, well, I found the shadows on this bear. Won't go through that, but this is E35 to put in the shadows now that I found those shadows. I like where they are, so I'm just going over the same areas with this E35 and decided that this bear was pretty much going to be E30s, but there is going to be a bit of combination with E40s as well. Going to tone them down a little bit because those 40s are kind of that gray brown. When I go into those shadows, when I color them, Now here is that E39, so you'll really see. I don't want to make any harsh lines. I kind of feather it a bit, so all of my lines are not just solid, because it's more difficult for me to blend out a solid line. Like if I made a straight line across underneath that hat, sure, that might be fine for that hat to have that solid of a shadow on the bear's face. But if I'm trying to make a gradation down into the face, it's really hard to blend from a solid line. And so I just kind of wiggle my marker to give it kind of more of a feathered look, and then I can go in from there and blending out easier. It's kind of when you're feathering on a wall, when you're painting, and if you make straight marks on your corners and for trim, then you see those harsh lines at the end. But if you feather it out, it's the same thing here. When I have an image that is larger, like this one, I like to go from the dark shadows into the body. So not coloring the whole image first, but just finding those shadows and then working my way into the body. If I have a very small image or a thin line that I'm trying to get blended, well, then I like to come in and fill in the whole image with the lightest color and then blend from the shadow areas. Now with this bear, the lightest was at E31, kind of giving a little bit of highlight on the face. And now that I have the whole bear colored in, I can come in with my darker colors and just decide if it needs more shading and emphasize those areas to make it round. Now I come in with the E40s. This is the E42 to put in the ears and on the muzzle, and an E43 to shade underneath the muzzle and in the ears, and up to an E44 to give that darkest look of the shadow, and then blend that into the rest of it, make that muzzle look rounded and the ears look like that there's a depth to them. And now I can also take those E40s, and I'm deciding that this would be good for kind of giving more contrast in the shadows for this bear, because that grayish brown is a nice shadow color kind of no matter what browns I use. I sometimes I'll come in with the E40s and just get into those darkest areas and give them shadow that way. Blend it out a bit, and here I am blending it with the E43. Sometimes mixing color families, especially in fur, helps to give it a little bit more interest and depth than just using one color family. Like if I just use all E30s, it looks a little flatter, I think, than when I add some E40s in with it. Now all of the animals are colored and we're ready to create the rest of the scene, so I hope you join me for part 3, focusing on the background, including the snow and the shadows. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye!